Two dead men appeared on a mountain and began to talk to Jesus. But that, in itself, would already be too impossible. One of them did not have a typical burial. God himself buried his body. No one has ever found his grave. The other one did not experience death. He was taken alive to heaven in a chariot of fire, disappearing from the earth without a trace. And now, centuries later, they are both there, standing, talking with Jesus. As if death had no authority over that scene. As if time didn't exist. It was as if the sky had torn apart reality just for that moment to happen. But what they are discussing is not the past. It's the future. This is what Jesus is about to face in Jerusalem. His death. But there's something strange here. They don't talk about death. There is a different word at the heart of this conversation. One word that changes everything the entire Bible wants to say. But nobody notices that on the first reading. Most people look at this scene and think, okay. Jesus shone, Moses and Elijah appeared, a voice spoke from heaven, the end. But that's just the surface. Because this is not a pretty scene. It's a scene constructed with absolute precision. Nothing there is decorative. Nothing is random. Not even the characters. Not even the place. Not even the right time. But to understand this, you need to go back a few days. Because this mountain doesn't begin at the mountain. It begins with a question. Jesus looks at his disciples and asks, "Who do people say I am?" The answers come quickly. Prophet. Elijah's reincarnation. John the Baptist returning from the dead. But then Jesus shifts the focus of the question. He looks straight at them and says, "And you? Who do you say I am?" Silence. Until Pedro speaks. And when Peter speaks, he doesn't know it, but he crosses an invisible line in human history. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. For a moment, everything seems clear. They finally understood. They finally recognized it. But what comes next completely destroys that moment. Jesus begins to say something that no one expected. He says he's going to suffer, to be rejected, to be killed, and then resurrect. This doesn't fit. The Messiah does not die. Messiah wins. Messiah conquers. Messiah rules. But Jesus speaks of the cross. Pedro can't stand it. He pulls Jesus aside and confronts him, as if he were correcting God. This cannot happen to you. And Jesus' answer cuts through the air like a blade. Get out of my way. The climate is changing. The disciples no longer understand anything. What are they following after all? The king? The prophet? Or someone walking straight to death? 6 days pass. Silence. Confusion. Voltage. And then Jesus called 3 of them. Pedro. James. John. And he climbs a mountain. Isolated. Difficult to climb. The kind of place where the air is thin and the silence is heavy. Some believe it to be Mount Hermon. A place so high it seems to touch the sky. They climb for hours. The body gets tired. The mind weighs. And when they finally reach the top, night begins to fall. And something strange happens. Jesus walks away. And he begins to pray. This is nothing new. But whenever he prays, something changes. Boys. Before the baptism, he prayed. And the sky opened. Before choosing his disciples, he prayed. And the direction was given. Before the cross, he prayed. And he faced the weight of the world. Now he prays again. And this time, the sky doesn't just answer. The sky invades reality. Jesus' appearance begins to change. Not like reflected light. Not like external shine. But as something that comes from within. His face changes. Their clothes become as white as bright light. There is no human reference point for that. It's not fabric. It's not a reflection. It's glorious. And then, the impossible happens. 2 figures emerge at the top of the mountain. An ancient presence. Heavy. Moses. And next to him, Elias. 2 pillars of Israel's history. The law and the prophets. Foundation and voice. Beginning and announcement. And there they are, talking to Jesus. But the detail that no one expects comes later. They are not talking about glory. They're not talking about power. They're not talking about a kingdom. They are talking about leaving. On the way. regarding something Jesus needs to accomplish in Jerusalem. And the word used there is not common. It is full of meaning. It's the same idea of liberation, on the run, crossing, of Exodus. And at that moment, everything starts to connect. The scene at the top of the mountain doesn't stop. Nothing there is static. Everything seems alive, as if reality itself were being bent. Peter, James, and John are awake, but they are not fully aware of what they are seeing. Because there are moments in life when the eyes continue to function, but the mind simply can't keep up. Jesus is there transformed. Not just illuminated. Not just different. He seems to have let slip something that had always been hidden. As if the human form were just a thin layer over something much larger. And then they see Moses and Elijah. Two names that are more than just characters. These are entire eras of Israel's history. Moses represents more than just one man. It represents the origin of a nation, the liberation from slavery, the sound of the sea parting, the voice of God in the fire of Sinai, the tablets of the law, the desert, on promise. And Elijah is not just a prophet. He represents confrontation, fire falling from the sky, rebellion against corrupt kings, spiritual loneliness, the silence of God, followed by a whisper. Together, they are like two pillars supporting the entire spiritual memory of a people. And now, they are standing before Jesus. But what makes this even stranger is their behavior. They are not in shock. They are not confused. They're not asking, "How is this possible?" They are conversing naturally, as if that meeting had been arranged before the foundation of the world. And the subject is not abstract. It's not symbolic. It's specific. They are talking about something that Jesus is about to face. Something the text calls a departure. But that word is too small, too weak, almost deceptive. Because in the original text, the idea is not just about getting out. It's a crossing. It's a type of escape that involves pain, purpose, and liberation all at once. Something that not only ends a life, but it opens a path for many others. And that changes everything. Because now what is being discussed is not just the death of Jesus. That is the meaning of this death. And even more, what will she release? Meanwhile, Pedro watches. And what he feels is not understanding. It's an emotional emergency. He sees something so intense, so beyond human scale, that he feels the need to interrupt, to organize, to give form to the inexplicable. Then he speaks. "Sir, it's good that we're here." As if that could be contained. As if that moment could be stabilized. As if eternity could be transformed into a human structure. Let's build tents. One for Jesus. One for Moses. One for Elijah. But Peter's mistake is not in his intention. It's up to the interpretation. He tries to impose order on something that wasn't meant to be contained. Because that's not a visit. It's not a meeting. It is not a symbolic apparition. It's a clash of realities. And without realizing it, Peter is trying to reduce glory to something manageable. But heaven does not negotiate with human limitations. And before he finishes the sentence, something changes again. A cloud begins to form. But it's no ordinary cloud. It's not meteorology. It's not the weather. It's presence. An invisible density that begins to occupy the space between them. The kind of presence that, in other parts of biblical history, filled entire temples to the point that no one could remain standing. The cloud is growing. It intensifies. And it involves everything. And then comes the voice. Not from inside the mountain. Not from within the mind. But from outside of human reality. "This is my beloved Son." And everything stops. Because this is not new information. It's a definitive statement. A final line is being drawn over all that came before. Moses spoke. Elijah spoke. The prophets have spoken. The law has spoken. But now, the voice changes level. Listen to him. Not as a suggestion. Not as advice. But as a replacement. Everything that came before had the function of pointing the way. Now the person being pointed out is present. And when the voice ends, the cloud dissipates. And what remains completely changes the scenario. Moses is no longer there. Elias didn't either. Only Jesus remains. And he is in human form again. Silent. As if nothing had happened. But for the disciples, everything changed. Because now they can no longer say they didn't see it. They can no longer treat this as a metaphor. They saw the glory. They saw the law and the prophets before the Messiah. They heard the voice of God confirming their identity. And even so, they still don't fully understand what this means. Because the real shock is yet to come. As they descend the mountain, the world below remains the same. But they don't. They carry something they don't know how to explain. And Jesus gives a strange instruction: don't tell anyone. Not yet. Because what they saw cannot be understood before what will happen afterward. Glory must be understood through the lens of the cross. And not the other way around. But they don't know that yet. And then reality hits them again. Because the mountaintop was not the end of the journey. It was just an intermission. The real showdown is still waiting in the valley. The descent from the mountain is not silent by chance. She is heavy, as if each step brought back the weight of the world. Pedro is still trying to process what he saw. Tiago still hasn't said anything. John watches Jesus, as if any movement of his could explain what has just happened. But Jesus walks on as if nothing has changed. And that, in itself, is disconcerting. Because for them, everything changed. At the top of the mountain, the impossible opened up. Now, on the way back, ordinary reality seems too strange to be normal. And then they arrive. The valley. The real world. And he is not waiting patiently. He's in chaos. A crowd. A desperate father. Confused disciples. And a boy in deep suffering, overwhelmed by something they can't expel. The contrast is stark. Just minutes before, they had stood before the glory of God. Now they are faced with human inadequacy. At the top, in the valley, confusion. At the top, a voice from heaven. In the valley, silence and failure. And this change is not just geographical. It's spiritual. It's as if the universe has two rhythms, the pace of revelation and the rhythm of human limitation. The 9 disciples who stayed behind tried to do what Jesus did. But they couldn't. And that says it all. Because now it's not just a story about power. It's a story about addiction. The boy's father is devastated. He had seen too much suffering to easily believe in hope. And the disciples are trapped. They have words. There are attempts. They put in the effort. But they don't have enough authority to change that situation. And then Jesus speaks. And the phrase is not gentle. She cuts through the room like a judgment. How long will I be with you? It's not just simple anger. It's painful. It's the burden of carrying a generation that can't see what's right in front of their eyes. And then he acts. No ritual. No show. Effortless. Only authority. And the boy is freed. As if what seemed impossible in the valley. It was too simple for what happened on the mountain. But the point is not the miracle. It's the contrast. Because now the disciples are beginning to understand something they were not yet able to formulate. The power does not lie with them. It never was. And it never will be. And that brings them back to what they saw at the top. Jesus shining. Jesus speaking with Moses and Elijah. Jesus being confirmed by the voice from heaven. And slowly, a connection begins to form. What they saw on the mountain was more than just a revelation. It was preparation. Because there has been a growing tension since the beginning of this journey. Jesus had already said something before ascending, that he would suffer, that he was going to die, and that he would be resurrected. But that didn't fit with the image of glory. How can someone who shines like the sun be defeated? How can someone who converses with Moses and Elijah be humiliated? But that's exactly where the story begins to split into 2 lines. A line goes up. Another one goes down. At the top of the mountain, glory. Identity revealed. The sky is opening up. It's not valid, pain. Human failure. Broken world. And Jesus is the only one who crosses both without getting lost in either. And this raises a question that begins to grow within the disciples. Who is this man, anyway? Not just a master. Not just a prophet. Not just the expected Messiah. But someone who seems to belong to both worlds at the same time. And then comes another strange detail. While they are still dealing with all of this, a question arises among them. Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? This question is not random. It is born from what they have just seen. Because they saw Elijah in flesh and presence. And that should mean something. But Jesus responds in a way that is even more profound than they expect. He does not deny the prophecy. He repositions it. And it says that Elijah has already come. But he was not recognized. And it was rejected. Just as the Son of Man will be. Now everything is starting to connect. The pattern hasn't changed. The world continues to respond to the revelation in the same way. Rejection. Misunderstanding. Resistance. The forerunner suffers. The envoy is suffering. And that's no accident. It's structure. And while this is forming in their minds, one thing is starting to become clear. The transfiguration was not destiny. It was a preparation. Because what comes after it is not continuous glory. It's a continuous descent. On the way to Jerusalem. Heading towards rejection. Towards suffering. But also towards something they cannot yet imagine. Because if the mountain revealed who Jesus is, what comes next will show what he came to do. And these two things only make sense together. Glory without the cross explains nothing. A cross without glory destroys everything. And Jesus carries both of them. There's a detail in that conversation in the mountains that almost nobody notices. And he changes everything. Luke records something that the other Gospels do not highlight with the same clarity. Moses and Elijah were talking to Jesus about his departure. But that word, in the original text, is not a common word. It's not just an exit. It's not just death. It's something much deeper. It's an exodus. And when that word appears, it carries a whole world with it. Because exodus is not an isolated event. It's a pattern. It is liberation through suffering. It is an exit through rupture. It is a passage through the impossible. And now imagine the impact of that within that scene. Moses, the man who led the first exodus, is talking to Jesus regarding the new exodus. Not from Egypt, but it stems from the very condition of being human. Not from a pharaoh, but from sin, death, and separation from God. This is not merely symbolic. It's structural. It's as if history is folding back on itself. The beginning conversing with the end. The first liberator looking at the last. And understanding that everything he did was just a draft. A shadow. A draft of something much bigger. And that changes how you view Moses. It is not destiny. He is the sign. He is not the solution. He is the advertisement. And now he is faced with the solution itself. But Moses is not the only one there. Elias too. And that is equally profound. Because Elijah represents another dimension of history. It represents the clash between loyalty and corruption. Between truth and idolatry. Between the living God and false systems of power. And it also represents something even more important, the promise of return. The last book of the Old Testament ends with a sense of expectation. A silence lasting centuries. And a promise. Elijah would come before the great day of the Lord. This is not just prophetic poetry. It's a collective expectation. Israel has spent centuries looking to the sky and asking, when will Elijah return? And now he's there. Not as an idea. Not as a symbol. But as a real presence. And he's not announcing something far off. He is confirming something that is already happening. The silence is over. The wait is over. But there's something even deeper going on in this conversation. Because Moses and Elijah are not just observing Jesus. They are recognizing something in him. Something they don't have. Something that none of them fully grasped. Final authority. Because Moses saw God partially. Elijah heard God whispering. But Jesus, it not only sees or hears. He is the full embodiment of what they were pointing out. And this creates an invisible hierarchy in that scene. Not about human superiority, but in terms of compliance. In conclusion, closing. And so, while this reality takes shape on the mountaintop, Pedro enters the story again. And as always, he tries to react to what he can't control. Let's make tents. One for Jesus. One for Moses. One for Elijah. But this reveals something deeper than it seems. Pedro is not just being impulsive. He's trying to freeze the moment, transforming revelation into structure, transforming presence into permanence. But there's a problem with that. The sky wasn't made to be parked in, and glory was not made to be captured. Because that's how you try to capture eternity. You lose sight of its purpose. And then comes the answer. Not from Jesus, but from heaven itself. A cloud begins to descend. And this cloud is not a metaphor. She is present. The same presence that filled the tabernacle. The same presence that guided Israel in the desert. The same presence that covered the temple. And now it covers the mountain. And when the cloud speaks, everything changes level. This is my beloved Son. And then comes the command that redefines the entire spiritual hierarchy of history. Listen to him. No more Moses. No more Elijah. No more human interpretation of revelation. Now it is the Son himself. And that doesn't diminish the past. But that concludes its function. Because everything that came before, it was preparation. Now the fulfillment has arrived. And when the cloud disappears, Moses and Elijah are no longer there. Only Jesus remains. As if history itself had rearranged itself around him. And that's the most important point of the whole scene. The mountain did not reveal three figures. Revealed a supremacy. But not a supremacy of force. A supremacy of compliance. Because everything converges on him. Allah's. Every prophecy. Every promise. And now the disciples have a memory that cannot be erased. They saw the sky touch the earth. And they heard the voice of God repositioning all of human history. But they still don't understand the price of that. Because of the glory they saw. It wasn't the final destination. It was only the beginning of the descent. And the descent leads to Jerusalem. And Jerusalem leads to the cross. If the story ended at the mountain of transfiguration, everything would be simpler. But that would also be incomplete. Because that light wasn't the final destination. It was just a preview. A glimpse. A moment stolen from the future and placed in the present to prepare the disciples for what was to come. And what comes next is not another mountain of glory. It's a mountain of pain. Jerusalem. And inside it, the cross. In the transfiguration, Jesus is revealed in light. On the cross, he is hidden in shame. On the mountain, its glory transcends human form. On the cross, his humanity bears the weight of the world. In the mountains, the sky speaks. At the cross, the sky falls silent. On the mountain, Moses and Elijah appear as witnesses. On the cross, even the disciples disappear. Everything is reversed. Everything is in contrast. But none of this is an accident. Because these two scenes are not competing with each other. They complement each other. On the mountain, Jesus is seen as he truly is. On the cross, he chooses what he will do with it. And that changes everything. Because the transfiguration answers the question, who is he? The cross responds with another, what did he come here to do? And both answers need to exist together. Without the mountain, the cross seems like defeat. Without the cross, the mountain becomes an empty spectacle. But together, they form a single revelation. Jesus is not just glory. And it's not just suffering. It is the point where the two meet. And it is here that Moses and Elijah take on an even deeper meaning. Because Moses represents liberation through blood. The first Exodus. Where a lamb dies so that a people may live. But that blood was just a symbol. A shadow. And Elijah represents a confrontation with a world in decline. Calling Israel back. Calling the people back to the living God. But neither of them managed to complete the mission fully. Moses did not enter the promised land. Elijah did not see the final restoration of Israel. They both pointed to something bigger. Something that had never happened before. And now, at the top of the mountain, they see. What they predicted has come to pass. What they announced is right there. And what they started will be completed by another. But there is something even deeper here. Because Moses died. And God took care of his body. Elijah did not die. He was taken to heaven alive. And yet, the two of them appear together. That's not a minor detail. That's a statement. Death does not limit the presence of God. Not even the past. Not even the future. Not even the way someone left this world. Because they are both there before Jesus. And this communicates something impossible to ignore. God is not the God of the dead or of the living alone. He is God over both. And about everything that exists between them. But the best part is yet to come. Because while the glory is still fresh in the disciples' memory, Jesus begins to speak again. But now, the tone changes. He doesn't talk about glory. He talks about the path. He speaks of suffering. He speaks of rejection. And that destroys any simple expectations they still had. Because no one can easily reconcile a glorified Messiah with a Messiah who suffers. But Jesus is not trying to fit this into human logic. He is revealing the pattern of the kingdom. Glory does not prevent suffering. She is going through suffering. And then comes the invisible turning point of the story. They come down from the mountain. And the world hasn't changed. But they changed. And that's the hardest part of all. Because spiritual experiences don't remove the chaos from the world. They make you aware of it. And when they arrive at the valley, everything is broken. A boy in distress. Incapable disciples. A desperate father. And faith in collapse. It's as if the contrast was intentional. Mountain and valley. Revelation and limitation. Glory and human failings. And Jesus is at the center of both. He doesn't stay on top. He goes down. Because glory was not given for isolation. It was given to her for a mission. And here is the final shock of the entire narrative. The mountain revealed who Jesus is. The cross will show how far he will go for it. On the mountain he is worshipped. On the cross he is rejected. On the mountain he is accompanied by Moses and Elijah. On the cross he is abandoned. On the mountain the voice says, "Listen to him." On the cross he says, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" And yet, the two moments are connected by a single invisible thread: love. Because what leads Jesus from the mountain to the cross is not weakness. It's a decision. He is not dragged to the cross. He walks towards her, with the memory of that mountain still vivid, and with the certainty that the cross is not the end of the story. It is the path to resurrection. And when you put all of that together, Moses, Elijah, the mountain, the voice, the valley, the cross, you realize something frighteningly simple. The whole story is converging on a single person. Jesus is not a character within the story. He is the point where the whole story comes together. And the question that remains is no longer about Moses. Not even Elijah. Not even the mountain. The question is the same one that has been echoing since the beginning. Who do you say he is? Because after all of that, neutrality is no longer possible.